affiliate group. And as our first event by the research committee at the intersections of archives and historic interiors, our online panel's goal is to stimulate new productive collaborations among archival, research, and teaching communities in the field. And with this goal, we use the word flow as a concept connecting historic interiors and archives with an interdisciplinary understanding. And in this regard, for our first event, our essential question is, what can be the potential of archives to reframe historic interiors as an interdisciplinary field? And we hope our first step on the subject continues with more specific questions and concerns in the near future. And now let's welcome our esteemed panelist with our moderator. Our panelist, Nakahara, is a curator and librarian, and she holds her PhD in architecture history and design and has a graduate degree in library and information science. Her enthusiasm to learn about archives led her to intern at Columbia University's Every Architectural Archive, as well as the Museum of Modern Art in the 1990s. Then she finally emigrated to the United States from Japan in 2000 and has worked on various types of collections at multiple institutions, such as New York Public Library, the Skyscraper Museum, the Octagon Museum, and the Library of Congress. And our panelist, Esther Schmidt, is the founding director of the Center for Historic Houses and associate professor at Jindal Global University and teaching architectural history, design history, and heritage studies. She received her PhD from the University of Oxford, where she was Michal Wills Scholars and Tutor, and her scholarship focuses on the role of objects in interiors and how cultural encounters inform design processes. And some of her awards are Austin Award for Services in Decorative Arts, Stiftung from German Academic Scholarship Foundation, Memorial Foundation for Jewish Culture, Ian Carton Award, and Prize Lecturer from Schools of Advanced Study, University of London. And our panelist, Monika Pltzer, studied art history at the University of Vienna. She has been working at the Architekturzentrum Wien since 1998 and has been currently serving as the head of collections and curator at same institutions. She has led several national and international research and exhibition projects, taught at the University of Vienna and Technische Universität Wien, served as the editor of the Journal of the International Confederations of Architectural Museum. She was also visiting scholar at the Center for European Studies at Harvard University, and her research focuses on transnational architectural history. And our moderator, Paola Ardizzola, is a research committee member of our affiliate group and currently lecturer at the Cardiff Met University in the United Kingdom. She was recently curator of the exhibition and catalogue of the architecture of Zwihecker and Italian projects, taught at the Lebanese American University, the German University in Cairo, and was a founding member of the architecture department at the Antalya International University. The Bruno Zevi International Prize and the Dot Senior Fellowship are among her awards, and her main academic fields are criticism in ancient and contemporary history of architecture. And as the research committee, we would like to express our thanks to our affiliate group and Society of Architecture Historians for their support to organize our online panel. And now, Paola, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Meral. Thank you so much. Can you hear me properly?
Yes.
Very good. So first, I would like to say that it is a great honor and a pleasure for me to chair this panel. We really organize it with, intense debate and joy. And thanks to our esteemed panelists, we are very happy all to be here. Well, our first panelist is Mary Nakahara, and she's going to talk about the Library of Congress wide-ranging architecture collection. So please, Mari, you have 15 minutes. And then after the 15 minutes, I will take a question from the audience to you, while at the end of all the speeches, we will have a proper debate about 30 minutes long. Please, Mari.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Paola, Meral, and affiliated group members, and thank you for the invitation to let me talk about architectural collection at the Library of Congress. And my purpose to make this presentation is I have been thinking about how archival materials connecting to the scholars or more general public, but this is a professional group, so I like to focus on that point. And just let me share. I shared one time. I just put into the chat some of the URLs, links that I am going to talk about. Sometimes when I see the presentation, oh, it's too fast, I missed it. So please make a copy of that. This will be useful for your research. So now I am going to share my screen and start talking about it. So my title is More Than You Expected, Library of Congress Wide-Ranging Architectural Collection. So to begin with, that we are basically the library. It's like a museum, but the point to make by saying wide-ranging architectural collection is that architectural collection is not limited to the division where I work, which is called Prints and Photographs Division. Under my name, it said Prints and Photographs Division. So what you have to know by yourself is, what are you looking for? Exactly what researching for, or what kind of materials you are looking for. For instance, are you looking for the specific building's interior project or specific time period? Or are you looking for the original materials, or reproduction or survey documents are acceptable? Or what kind of media, drawings, photographs, or manuscript type of materials? Or you are looking for more technical information like catalogs or actual products like wallpapers or anything else, for instance, books, magazines, or ephemera collection. So when you contact us, please make sure that you have exact information. We do not actually like, do you have this? And that gives me yes, no. Of course, we will provide more information, but the more we do know your research purpose, what you are looking for, we can help more. Because, so this is a kind of outline of the library collection. As I mentioned, even though architecture, design, engineering related materials, or per se interior related materials, which are divided into many, actually 22 different reading rooms. When I talk about Library of Congress collection, I usually say you can think of big two categories, either the bound materials like books, magazines, or special format, means unbound. So bound materials are most likely sometimes rare books, which also include a lot of interior collection. And a general collection means that books or magazines, and a newspaper or serial sometimes contains the information related to that. And English materials are divided for these three sections. And other specifically language materials, for instance, Asian language, Hispanic language, European languages, or African and Middle Eastern languages, we held about 470 different language materials in the book section. And the special format becomes like flat materials, music division. You may be interested in theater interior, and they have a theater-related materials in the music division, or films, or motion picture, a recorded sound, voice. These things are under the motion picture, broadcast, and the recorded sound section. Of course, some text materials under the manuscript division. Geography and map, maybe not that much for the interior. And the prints and photographs division has about 17 million items. And we have three pillars, big pillars. One of them is at 3/4 of the collection as the photography collection, and graphic arts, and architectural design and engineering. From now, I will use the abbreviation ADE, stands for Architecture, Design, and Engineering. So ADE is the only collection in the prints and photographs division, which contains photographs and some other materials, drawings, sometimes manuscript. Most of them we actually transfer to the manuscript division. But this is the kind of the way that we divide the materials. So it's really complicated. If you have some specific topic, you may have to, surf around many divisions. So you get some sense that how it's divided. So these are the two major cataloging systems I posted, and then I have already put it into the chat. But left side is called Library Congress, like a wide range cataloging online catalog. And you can start to do the search from here, but please make sure that you click that red circle, which allows advanced search, and there are many ways to search it. But on the right side is a prints and photographs division online catalog, just dedicated to what we have in the, we call P&P, prints and photographs division. So if I say from the P&P means prints and photographs division, then you can specifically search it. So what we have in the visual materials, prints and photographs division handles the visual materials. So we can search it, and you can actually see the image if we have scans, So from now, I am going to show some examples that, for instance, are you looking for the original drawings? Yes, and it's a diverse, like this is the Richard Morris Hunt Lennox Library section in a color. You may want to see the colors or how the depth will be determined by the shadow or how the design work went through. Or are you looking for more detailed section of the building? Left side, this is coming from the Charles Berry, it's England. So it's not limited to the America. We have international collection. The right side shows that specifically the bathroom elevation. So sometimes like restoration happens and then people are seeking these interior materials. Or this is the Charles Eames, the case study house number 8. And these elevations shows the original and the color scheme and elevations. But if you look on the right side, this is a historic American building survey, which started in 1933, and it still continues. So National Park Service runs this project, and we have been doing the survey project for, we call HABS, HABS. So what I would like to say is, are you looking for the real original materials that Charles and Ray created? Or on the right side, HABS survey document, does it satisfy your needs? So this is something that we would like to know, and you may want to look into it. Because when you search case study house number 8, the right side HABS drawing may not show up. So this is the Vinod Rice interior study, but he didn't make this one as the project, real project. He made this drawing for the kind of fabric studies. So kind of aluminium, folic, metallic type wallpaper or fabric for the furniture. Are you looking for this kind of information? Or slides. We have tons of the slides. Slides collection often contains the drawings, even though you did not find the drawings, original drawings. We may have in the slide format, and then also interior slides. This is a Paul Rudolph, Barrow's Welcome Company, which is already torn down. So we have drawing slides format, or we have interior slides. This shows really a good color scheme in the slide photo. We have about 20,000 slides, not only for the Barrows, but Paul Rudolph. If you look through them, this will be the good resource to learn about it. Or same building, but it's more like a text type materials. This is also Historic American Building Survey manuscript materials. About a few years ago, one scholar was dedicated to do this work before the building was torn down. So she actually went to the building and photographed many of the things which are included in this report. This is a 48 pages report, and you can see right before the destruction that how building looks like on the right side. Is this something that you are looking for as an information? And you can go more details. I picked up some of the mantle drawing for the Richard Moyes Hunt, or Binold Rice's Chrysler Building entrance hall ceiling drawing left bottom, or more detailed carving of the woodwork, or furniture, the table, or chandelier drawing. Especially for the historic preservation and the restoration, these items are really popular to be looked for. Or are you looking more product type or cataloging record? Catalog means like a sample or product catalog, or these are the examples of the wallpapers. So we do have such collections as well. And of course, as I said, photographs. Are you looking for the photographs when the building was built or interior was completed? Or the more contemporary photo showing the historic building interior is okay and satisfying your purpose? Depending on your purpose, we can retrieve many different types of the photographs. So on the top left, this was built in 1875, but Carol Highsmith recently, 12 years ago, took the photo in 2010. Very right is by Norman McGrath. Also, the building was built early 20th century, but Norman recorded it in the, this century. Or some of the historic photo, the middle left to the bottom. This is the famous building, the Biltmore in North Carolina. And this really shows how the building was decorated. And a curator from the Biltmore came over. Do you see over the mantle, there is a Whistler painting? And it was originally hung over this mantle, but now it's taken out from the wall. And even the curator at the Biltmore did not know where it was hung originally. So when they found this photo, they were really excited. And some of the time period photographs in the middle, 3 black and white, are they useful for you? Or this is just for the courtroom photos. And on the right side is illustration. We have the courtroom dedicated Seagram survey photos, bunch of them, which one of the examples is on your left. And even though if you do not have the photo or any information, this is a point that we have a graphic art section, and graphic art section collects the courtroom, especially during the court sessions. The people are not allowed to go in, and there is an illustrator to just, draw the graphic art. And this doesn't have any people in there, but it shows at least the inside of the courtroom. And this may be useful for you. And some postcards or ephemera collection or folio. Folio sometimes be helpful. It's not only the flat, it's considered as a book section, or we do have in the prints and photographs division, some like a lithographs or etchings and showing the interior. And on the right, 2 postcards, we have postcards collection. Postcards are really useful to see the color. Majority of the 19th century or early 20th century buildings are photographs in the black and white, but postcards often show the color scheme, which are useful. And in the middle is the postcard in the album. And this album is by, it's not created, it's part of the collection of John Margolis. John Margolis traveled around about 100,000 miles in America and then also collected some ephemera. And this is ephemera, and we do care, but this is not still yet individually cataloged. So you may not know such interior postcards is in the ephemera collection. So these are, I was showing some examples, but a few years ago, I took a job about 9 years ago, and to learn about this 4 million item in 140 collections are so much for me to learn. So I had to digest by myself, and I created this research guide. So I'm specifically showing this collection side, but if you surf around, you will learn more about our diverse collection and a wide-ranging collection, and you may be able to make a good use of it. So I will stop here, and if you have any questions, please send the Ask a Librarian question, or you can just directly email me. All right, I am going to stop here.
Thank you very much, Mari, for this exhaustive overview of your institution. Really very, very rich indeed. And now I would like to ask the audience if there is a specific question to Mari. You can type it in the chat. So we could pose the question to her. I don't see so far any specific question. So no, actually, Mari, I have a question. So maybe it might be interesting to discuss. So the very first matter you share with us is about having clear in mind the purposes and goals of our research. I would like to ask you if there is a specific methodology to be pursued for researching historic interiors in your institution, and if in your cataloging system there is a specifically dedicated directory for the historic interiors.
Well, yes, no. It's been really difficult and challenging for me too, how to guide the people to the appropriate section or appropriate division. That's why it's better to for us to receive the question first. We used to do more and more research interviews, but this digital era, it's been so difficult because people believe that what we show online is the all almost what we have, but I would say what you see on the website or visual image, even though the bibliographic record would be probably a peak of the big iceberg. So the better way is that you contact us. We are kind of the guide to lead researchers to the appropriate division, appropriate collection. So internally we communicate, but yes, if you go, let me put here. So this is the listing, the kind of research guide. Then you can see the different divisions and then you visit individually, but people are not taking that much time to go through this. And it's all written here, how to order the reproduction, how to access to the reading room, what kind of collection we have. If you go to the different collections or divisions, they list the finding aid, but people may be lost. So anyway, if you do not want to take that much time, contact somebody or throw the question through the Ask a Librarian. But to select a division, at least you may want to know, would you like to get some visual materials? Would you like to get the manuscript type information? Or would you like to get the book? Then just select the appropriate division and then just start from there.
Thank you very much, Mari. And we will have the opportunity to ask questions again at the end of the speeches of the three panelists. And now I would like to invite Mimi Schmidt, that I see here with us. Hello, you are mute, so we cannot hear you. Yes, okay.
Thank you very much. So pleased to be here. And I'm particularly excited because I'm talking from the Center for Historic Houses of India about India, and we are really at the very beginning. I'm just sharing my presentation. So at the moment, we don't even have a single comprehensive book about the historic interior in India. So we have books dedicated to architecture, architectural typologies. So you can guess that this is the situation. And we are really very much at the beginning. So let me just share. And
yes, please. Yes, indeed. I just wanted to announce your title, Archive and the Historic Interiors in India, a fragile connection with changing subjects. Mimi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. What you see here is a library and an archive of a private historic house. And this one image embodies so many of the difficulties and the underlying topics associated with this topic of archives in the historic interior. First of all, the distinction between archive and library is often not very clear. And I'll come back to this in a minute. And what you see there is Professor Mahmoodabad from Mahmoodabad Estate in a place near Lucknow. And you can probably see this haunting image of almost with the dust. And this is a neglected building. This is a building that tells a story not only of an archive, but a story of a family, a story of a country, because this is very much associated with the history of colonialism, and also with the history of partition, and also with the history of princely estates. So very consciously, I've chosen this image to also focus on archives in historic interiors, in the former princely estates, in private archives, and how difficult it is to access them, to understand them, to care for them, because given this complicated and complex history and the climatic situation in India with very high levels of humidity, it is extremely difficult to preserve documents. And I'm coming to the next slide. These are my two premises and starting points for this presentation. To date, there has not been a single comprehensive publication on the historic interior in India. Publications typically focusing in the area of the built environment are on architectural typologies such as the Haveli, the palace, the fort, the bungalow, or Indian art. Very often these are distinct and they're not kind of talking to each other. And also we have the difficulty with language in a country as vast as India with so many different languages. How do we call these typologies? What is a fort? Is it a gar? Is it a kila? How do we call a palace? All the terminology is really very unclear, and people are also kind of arguing about this. Should we use the English or not? Is this part of a colonial history or not? So, it even starts from the kind of methodological point of view and terminological point of view. Number two, I want to quote something from a young postdoc at the University of Chicago, Sarah Pillai, who said, India is poor in record keeping. And we have to understand that this kind of tradition of archives that we are familiar with in Western countries is not necessarily the same in non-Western countries. So how do we deal with this? How can we talk about interiors when there are no written records or few written records? And I'm going to talk more about this. Now, the questions deriving from these premises that I shared with you are, why have there not been extensive publications on the historic interior? And how can we start addressing this gap in a meaningful way? And connected to archives, if we cannot rely on written records, to what extent can we use the existing archival records, and what are alternative ways of researching and understanding the historic interior in India? So something that we started just recently at the Center for Historic Houses that I set up at OP Jindal Global University, that meanwhile has become a national expert heritage body, is this research project entitled Interior Worlds, Rooms, Pleasure, Diplomacy and Sociability in Indian Palaces from the 17th to the early 20th centuries, with a focus on room typologies. Room typologies in India are quite different, and there are different names and different functions and different ways of how these were used. And most, the most important difference is possibly that there isn't very much furniture. So what you normally see is just an empty room. How do you start with this, seeing this empty room with a heavy focus on surface decoration, such as murals, for example? So what is needed are new methodologies and comprehensive studies dedicated to the historic interior in India. A consideration of archives for the study of the historic interior in India necessitates our understanding of archives, both as a source, but also as a subject, with an understanding of their diverse histories. What we see here is a beautiful room in a fort in Juna, Meral, and Meral is actually a name, it has a double meaning. It means palace and it means apartment or room. And this already shows this kind of ambiguous relationship in India between the exterior and the interior, which is very often fluid. Now, so imagine you have this room and you know nothing about it. And what I thought was striking is these plates there on the wall that you can see. That is a balcony that was used for ceremonial functions. It is called a gopta, but it was part of a larger room called a darbar room, which is a semi-public space where you invite distinguished guests and for political discussions, ceremonies of gift giving and so on. So now we have a number of questions. How on earth did these blue willow pattern porcelain plates end up in this remote place in Rajasthan? And how can we start studying this without having any written resources at your disposal? So one way that I started realizing was I have to work visually much more than with textual resource. And then initially I was extremely hesitant to share my research, because as someone who has focused on the historic interior in Europe, this was a totally new approach. And then I was very interested in how these plates are installed in the wall and how they're reinterpreted in a form of kind of Indian chinoiserie. As you can see, there are mirror elements in between. And what I was trying to do is I was trying to find other examples and used all of these kind of clues, visual clues, to understand more about it. And then from there, I was going from one topic to the next. So this brings me to the next question, the issue of terminology. So I wanted to start with the problem that an archive as a place for memories, as a place for record keeping, was closely connected with other types of rooms that are worth to study. For example, manuscripts would be illustrated, which brings them into their close proximity to areas called tasvir khana. And this comes from the Persian. Tasvir relates to image and portrait. Khana or khana means house, can also mean space or workshop. So this is a place where painters would work. And this could also relate to archive. Karkhana could be used for a workshop. And this all relates to kind of administrative features coming from the Mughal period and the Rajput times and culture. And it's not only that the Rajputs kind of copied things from the Mughals, but it was really multi-directional. Even with rooms such as the Darbar room that we saw earlier, it was the Mughals who saw that in the Rajput context and then added elements to it, also from Persia, and then vice versa. We also have the term Bandar Khana, which means inventory, storage area, often used for grains and things like that. We have the Kitab Khana, a book house that was used in the Mughal context. In the Hindu context, you often have this term Pustakale, meaning library. Puraleg or Abhilekha means archive. And here on the left, we see a 16th century illustration, a manuscript from the British Library, where you see both a scribe and a painter working together in this kind of space on the floor, and illustrating beautifully this kind of fact that an archive is also an interior in itself in the Indian context. Coming back to Mahmudabad estate, here you see books. Again, I'm arguing that books and manuscripts belong together. So the library and the archive are kind of similar and connected in the Indian context. This particular Kila or palace or fort has about 80,000 books. And if you look carefully on this table, you see an album of photographs. And currently this is part of the Endangered Archives program as part of the British Library initiative. And I can, I'd like to point out that when we study archives in India, because of the complicated history of India, we also need to look at other archives outside of India, particularly in the current UK. So here we have manuscripts in Arabic and Persian from that range between 150 and 250 years old, some of them up to 500 years old. But now, how about the subject areas? There is no subject area dedicated specifically to the historic interior. We kind of have to read between the lines, and we have to use these kind of images from any kind of topics in order to draw conclusions. And we heard earlier, it really depends on what your research interest is. And talking about the 20th century, 19th, 18th, or earlier, the Mughal period, this will require a very different approach. So in this case here, we have the topics of mathematics and astronomy, medicine, logic, metaphysics, beliefs, jurisprudence, prophetic sayings. Religion is very strongly associated with this. And if you look carefully at this image that I provided here on the left, you see the kind of dilapidated situation of this magnificent historic building. And this is due to the partition. And there is a law called the Enemy Property Act, and it was recently amended in 2017 and 2018. In this case, members of the family were friends of Jinnah and took the Pakistani citizenship. And although other members of the family had lived in India all their lives, now lost this property. They had been fighting for this property for over 50 years. And in the meantime, this building was crumbling. So we see that the history is very much associated with the present. And currently there is a digitization process going on. Many of the projects have been digitized, but because of this complicated history, the many lawsuits, and first of all, they gained it back, then they lost it again, it couldn't be concluded. So in itself, this digitization process of the archive is a tragedy, and shows how fragile history is, how fragile contents of archives are. As Elizabeth Yale pointed out, historians and other scholars who rely on archives do well to understand the histories that have shaped them. These histories constrain the kinds of histories that can be written from any particular archive. So here, some more images of this kind of dilapidated, beautiful Kila of Mahmudabad. And when you go to the library, if you enter that building, I'm not sure whether you are able to enter this building anymore, given the complicated legal situation. You cannot really properly walk. You have to make sure where you walk, because you can fall down and this floor can literally collapse. And here I felt this was a beautiful image showing the chairs piled up on the exterior, highlighting how the or how it's kind of everything is upside down. The interior is now outside of the building in this kind of in-between space between the exterior and the interior. Now, this is the family, a Shia Muslim family of Mahmoudabad estate, a building that was already destroyed in 1857, the first war of independence, and then rebuilt. So it is this constant process of a family, their legacy, their different roots being rebuilt and reinvented. And this is part of the British Library Endangered Archives program that captures forgotten and still not written histories, often suppressed or marginalized. It gives voice to the voiceless. It opens a dialogue with global humanity's multiple paths. It is a library of history still waiting to be written. And this is very much the case in the Mahmoudabad estate. I wanted to share one image of the interior, again, another Darbar hall that we saw earlier in a different context in Rajasthan, which was the semi-public space where court would be held and the ruler Maharaja or Nawab would address his subjects or meet distinguished guests. And here just these kind of fragmented history of the digital Library of the Endangered Archive initiative by the British Library. Just to give you a very short overview of the history of modern archives in India, they are closely linked to colonialization in 1891 with the Imperial Record Department set up in Calcutta. And just to give you a comparison, the Public Record Office in Britain was established in 1838. By 1919, we have an Indian Historical Record Commission. In 1939, before independence already, access is given to non-current records prior to 1880. Before, you could only access records up to 1857. In 1947, the Imperial Record Department becomes the National Archives of India. In 1949, records up to 1901 become available to researchers. In 1993, the public records are the first legal attempt to manage these collections, and archives were created a good 45 years after independence. Currently,
excuse me, may I invite you to conclude, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
So currently, a lot of digitization processes are initiated, such as these, where the museums are sharing their collections, which are very important for the historic interior because we can use these miniature paintings to understand the historic interior. Here are some of the former princely estates. You cannot simply access them. You need to individually write to them in order to gain access to them. Here you see adaptive reuse of kind of fodder for elephants now being used as a library at the City Palace Udaipur, for example. This is one of the greatest examples I find of a private archive, library and museum at Castle Kanota, where you see the objects of the archive are displayed in the form of the museum, giving you also insights into the interior. And finally, the princely estates were put into the Rajasthani State Archive, with few exceptions where few personal records are still with the family. You can see and understand why it is so kind of difficult to access them for research. You can see them here. This is the first museum of an archive at the Rajasthani State Archives. And I just wanted to give this as an example to understand the historic interior, sometimes through these account books, for instance, that enabled me to understand when this room was designed because of the expenses used for this particular room. Conclusion: archives in the form of written records are insufficient to study the historic interior in India. Archival records can no longer be limited to geographical regions, especially when it comes to digitized resources. The complex history of India requires additional resources from and poses many challenges due to invasions, colonizations, a sudden transformation from a lack of record keeping to a modern archival system in the early 20th century. Research on the historic interior in India relies on alternative methods ranging from visual sources in the form of miniature paintings, murals, and others. And this is this kind of fragility of the situation in India that I wanted to conclude with. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mimi, for this very insightful talk about your experience there. It was not just very informative, but also very touching, also especially your passion in doing it. I would like to ask the audience if there is a specific question. You can type it in the chat. If not,
I would like to say that we are starting an archive, a digital archive at the Center for Historic Houses. It's already in place. We are starting the collecting process now. And I started a lecture series, Resilience, Historic Houses of India and Their Custodians, which is the first attempt to document the history of these families, their houses, in form of lectures where the families themselves are given a voice and telling their story, which can be viewed on the Center for Historic Houses YouTube channel, which I'll be sharing.
Thank you very much. And I just would like to comment that of course it's a very complicated process. I mean, the approach to those archives library, because as you show us, the content is as important as the container. So it somehow we are learning a different approach, which is a kind of holistic approach, that it's somehow something new in the Western idea, you know, where we are used to categorize everything for maybe an easier approach. But do you agree on the fact that if it is possible to coordinate and to work in a, you know, these intertwined different elements, it's possible to get a surprisingly richness at the end?
Absolutely. And you can see that initially I was so hesitant because I said, I cannot say anything about this building. I need to have the proof. And I stopped doing this because now I'm able to rely on my eye. And it takes a lot of time because I had to study so many cases. I had to travel and visit these places personally until I understood patterns and you know, visuals, the keys that I could read. And initially when I started this, I couldn't do that. So
yes, I just would like to read something that Lauren Drapala wrote. This is incredible work, Mimi. Your approach reminds me of an exhibition that I attended at the University of Pennsylvania. Because they had limited archives, they used the exhibition as a means of developing an archives of surviving architectural work of a forgotten architect. So this is really something that we can learn from in general, also as a methodology. And I do agree the way you proceeded by comparative studies, because indeed I saw many interiors that you show us. They will inspire a lot of monumental Islamic architecture that I saw in the Middle East. So I think that comparative studies, as you did it, it's a very good way, you know, for somehow giving a frame to this richness.
And just one thing, if I can say this, is extremely illuminating, because I found, for instance, chinoiserie, which until very recently was still regarded as a Western phenomenon, is not. It's a universal phenomenon. And also the fact that we misunderstand others or exoticize the other worked also the other way around in India, so that people, you know, showed Europeans with wings and things like that in a fantastical way. And that brings us much more together. I think East and West are coming closer together, and especially Edward Said's so polemical work has caused a lot of hatred, I think, between East and West. And I find we have to revise that.
Yes, Mimi, thank you so much. There is a question, but maybe we can postpone it after the last presentation. So now I invite Monika Pltzer. She will give a talk about interiors as embodied knowledge. So very interesting title, and we are eager to listen to you, Monika, please.
Yeah, first of all, hopefully everybody can see my presentation now on the screen, and thank you very much for inviting me to this panel. Yes, my take and point of departure for this talk will be our new permanent exhibition, which opened this February. And this exhibition itself is more or less a constructed interior, which expresses the view of the curator, designer, but furthermore, also the institutional Architekturzentrum Wien. It's the National Museum of Austrian Architecture, like many national museums in Europe and probably worldwide. We mainly focus on the 20th and 21st century, and we perceive ourselves as a change maker. We're burning questions from the past, from the present, and tomorrow are going to be asked. And our main question, which underlies nearly all our doing, is what can architecture do? And for me, as head of collections, I was also kind of asking, what can collections accomplish? Because collections in general, you never really see. They're all in the storage, in the depot, and to exhibit architecture. And I always talk about architecture because we don't make a distinction between interior or furniture and so on. We collect, besides single projects, we have more or less over 100 estates of architects. And of course, they include tons of interior design, furniture, and so on. So you will photographs, and so we don't really distinct between these things, which might be interesting then for the discussion later on. And we wanted to make this kind of collection and storage actually visible in our premises because the depot is always located outside. So we decided then to kind of focus on our depot as a knowledge base, but not just for storing it, but actually asking questions. We kind of have 7 questions and 7 topics. We asked our material, and the interiors I'm going to show you now are based very much on a narrative, on storytelling, not so much on the design issue, because we were really interested in kind of the social and political dimension of the interiors. And of course, at the same time, also about the tacit knowledge of architecture production. And this kind of brings us, where's the architecture produced? And that's produced in studios or in ateliers. And in general, when we pick up estates, we photograph these studios or the interiors because many of these spaces have been lost. Here you have an historical kind of photograph of the Hans Hollein studio in Vienna. And for us, it's really interesting how there's an interrelation between the studio and the production, and sometimes also the archives we take in. Here it's kind of a very creative, chaotic, let's say, a situation. And then when we picked up the archive, sometimes it was also not a kind of structured archive, but a very creative archive, but also his focus on model making. You can see also that when the material we took in, there was far more models than, for example, drawings. Or also looking at Margarete Schütte-Lihotzky's kind of archive, which was stored in a cupboard where she also had her clothes. And here you see her actually sitting on the kitchen table, starting to inventory her own archive. So it's also the architect who creates a narrative, starting to inventory it, and then gives it on to the institution. And we were lucky we don't hold her archive, but we have the estate of the photographer, Margareta Spilutini, who kind of documented this process. Then, of course, we also kind of ask the embodied grammar of architecture. So the color scheme was for us here really interesting. And it also fed then back to our approach, how we wanted to create our interior space within the exhibition. And we moved away from the white kind of cube, but actually used color to get this kind of sensational, emotional feeling when you also walk through exhibitions. And here you see kind of interesting drawings from the 30s, but also then later on from the 80s, where architects really got engaged and to work with these kind of color schemes. But then it's also interiors, also embodied gender. At the turn of the century, there was a big social transformation, but women in Vienna couldn't go to a cafe house, which was conceived as a public space only open for males. So they created their own kind of clubs, the women club. This one is quite interesting because it was kind of furnished by Adolf Loos. But then also by Joseph Hoffmann, the Villa Ast, it's actually a female boudoir and not a man boudoir. So it's also kind of the empowering of the female gaze, getting that back, because that was the boudoir of Maria Ast, actually the women who owned this villa. These documents are really very difficult. I mean, not the photograph, but I mean, for women, we hardly have any documents or archives because that's something one didn't collect. And all these women were not kind of incorporated in the canon. So for us, it's we have really tried to find a different way how to show their presence in the society. And that's also we kind of Who Shapes the City. And with Adolf Loos, we all know kind of this very manifest image, but it's actually Lina Loos who provided the money in order to buy this apartment. So it was her money who made it possible for him to furnish this bedroom. Then when they got divorced, she had to leave and leave everything behind. But then she recreated a bedroom quite similar. So gender studies now really ask, she was much more like the muse. She was probably the client. So you can really pay a kind of put into question what would have been Adolf Loos without his wife, Lina. Then another kind of these two interiors, you see it's the reconstruction of the Vienna State Opera, which was heavily destroyed after the World War. And you can see two exhibition designs, one with box seats and the other one is kind of with these rank seats by the same architect. But there's a political dimension behind this. The architect initially wanted to kind of create a more a more democratic approach, and he said he could do that with these rank seats. But the Austrian government or politicians really kind of then preferred the box seats because that linked them closer back to this kind of Habsburg industry. And at the same time, the money which was used at the beginning were actually donated by the Russians. And that was also something which then at the opening, who is sitting where in the opera, you can see mainly in the seating charts, first of all, the top politicians, but then all the kind of Western American high-rank officers. And the Russians, who were also part or were allies, are totally marginalized. And that already kind of tells you where we are at the Cold War. Then another embodied history, which we raised, who provides for us is kind of this Otto Wagner bathroom, which he initiated or initially designed for the World Trade Fair before he actually moved it to his own apartment. It was widely published on an international level. And this kind of mediation of architecture in magazines kind of was also recognized later on by contemporary Austrian architect Helmut Richter, who kind of created this Sares bathroom in the late 80s. And it really was picked up by all international magazines as well, to Japan and everywhere. So it's really also, I think, an interesting question how these architects, in order to enroll themselves within also historical traditions. Then social structures, I find interesting when you see these two photographs. Austria post-war was a Catholic country. So the Catholic Church really initiated a school program in the post-war years in order to raise or kind of Christians and really to strengthen Austrian society in that sense. And here you see quite an interesting photographer, which is Gerd Bresner, who works in this kind of very social documentary photograph, like the big magnums photographer would be. But you see this very hierarchical approach in his photography. Quite different, one could say, is this Stadt des Kindes, or City of Children, which was built in the 60s in the outskirts of Vienna, and unfortunately it was not put under protection, so it's been torn down, most of it. But you see a very different and unique approach by the architect Anton Schweighofer. Actually, these drawings are quite unusual because there are actually people in these drawings. So he has this kind of scenographic approach. It's like film stills where he really shows the interaction between society and the spatial environment. And it's quite amazing because it's a completely different approach to the photographs or to the pedagogic approach we saw before that. Here, of course, it's in the 60s. It's much more liberal. The idea is to be eye to eye with the children and the young people who live in there. It was built for about 300 pupils. And on the other hand, that the idea was also to open it up, and that these spaces could also could be used by the neighbors who were around that. And I'm also going to show you kind of more from this side, the City of Children. It had a public swimming pool, it had a theater, it had a pottery kind of club, a library, and so on. So it was a kind of huge public space within this idle city. And now coming back again to the exhibition and to the interior of this kind of constructed interior, and also to our collection. It's interesting, we don't use the term archive. We consider ourselves as a museum, so we kind of use the term collection. Why? Collection is probably a little bit more an open term, and on the other hand, also that we select things. I mean, for me sometimes, or the archival term is much more closely linked to an archival system, which is has a certain framework, also a legal framework, but we actually select the material which comes in. So I actually prefer the term collection. And as I've noted before, interiors for us is not a specific task we collect individually, but it's always part of a bigger item, of a bigger estate, or a bigger kind of fund we take in. And when somebody comes and does research, of course, you can find interiors because we don't inventory kind of paper by paper, but we do note interior design, furniture, and so on. So when somebody comes in and asks for a certain project, it's at least manageable or findable if we have drawings of interiors or furniture and so on. So that's maybe also a little bit of a different approach than if you just collect interior. Yeah, I think that's all for now. And I think we can start probably, hopefully, with the product.
Yes, Monika, thank you very much for your presentation and taking us to your collection. I like very much this distinction that you made in relation to the term archive, which seems something, you know, more all-comprehensive, while a collection, as you expressed, there is this critical approach. And somehow your talk brings us straight to the point of the issue related to architecture and interior architecture and interiors, and how they are considered also worldwide. I mean, there is a different approach because, for instance, in Italy, we have the same approach as in Austria. We consider architecture, interior architecture, and all the related design as one. But you know, worldwide, there are even specific departments of interiors or interior design. And these are courses completely different compared to the Department of Architecture. So somehow I think that it's very interesting, you know, to keep on debating about that. We start having many comments on the chat. So for instance, from Mimi, she wrote, while it is interesting that no distinction is made between interiors and architecture, I feel that, especially in Austria, a special emphasis on the interior is necessary, a personal reflection. When I introduced a course of the history of the interiors at the Technical University in Vienna, the subject hadn't been taught for over 100 years. So probably meaning that it was somehow included in the general subject of history of architecture. Yes. Yes, Monika, maybe you would like to comment, and then we can open, you know, our debate.
I think it all starts with the training, because I mean, architects were also trained interior design, so that was all conceived under the architectural training, and even at the University of Applied Art. Kind of, and the problem is when I take in an estate, I take in the whole body, and I would never kind of split up this body and then split it into interior design and because all these architectural projects also include interior design by most of the architects. So for us, it's really important that the body of the work stays together. Mm-hmm. It's all taught in one. So when
yes, clear. And we have a question from Lee to Monika. Isn't the distinction between a museum and an archive one of interpretation? Museums have a mission to interpret. Archives, I think, try very much not to do that.
That would be, but as I said, we are a museum, so we really, in a sense, have an active role. We also conduct research ourselves. As archives, that would be then also give them a very passive role and just make them as institutions who store things, more or less, and who are accessible. We as a museum, or the AZW, really understands itself to also put research in the foreground, or we do research ourselves as well. So I would say yes, probably there are two different missions. But what I have seen, and our museum is not linked to the university and so on, we want our archives to be used. And I think that's also very important, that we go actively outside. First of all, we also have to make, I think it's a challenge to make people from the outside know what materials we have, because a lot of the material is not really visible. And I think that's the problem a lot of archives and museums or whatever have, that we have huge storage spaces, but only a fraction of it is actually used.
Yes. Well, in this regard, Monika, I'm interested, and I hope also somebody else from the audience. How does it work when a researcher is interested in approaching some material, some objects, some elements that you have in the storage space? I mean, do you provide specific facilities to somehow to observe,
Yes,
to study. Yeah.
I mean, the archives are open, and the difference is that people actually go to our facility space and there we present the thing. It's like in every other collection. You look what we have, then you kind of send a contact sheet. We send you, our archives are not really digitized yet, because that's something we cannot do at the moment due to budget reasons. But we are working on that, and then you can come to our storage place and you have access to everything or whatever you want to look at.
Thank you. And I think there was a question for Mimi. Mimi, somebody was asking, do you work with documentary photography as part of your research?
Yes, yes, I do. Yeah, certainly.
Okay, so interesting. And yes, do we have other questions from the audience?
Well, this is Mari. I actually would like to ask everybody. I kind of know the answers, but as a researcher, what kind of information is helpful to start accessing or knowing the collection? Because as Monika said, it's almost impossible for us to digitize. Of course, not all of them, even the peak of them, it's so difficult. And text materials per se, kind of bibliographic record, really doesn't seem to be interesting or attracting to the researchers. What kind of information is necessary for us to prepare to attract the people or make the use of it?
Yes, Monika or Mimi, maybe you have an answer.
Well, I really think it depends on the individual research interests. It's very hard to generalize, but certainly I would have I rely very heavily on digital archives, especially the Met, V&A, Royal Collection Trust. And yeah, so, but maybe it would be good if you could have more kind of, thematic approaches or, helpful pages where you can maybe put some interesting information together, kind of edited, aspects. And maybe the one thing that I would like to say, I'd like to draw attention to the article Curtain Wars in the Harvard Design magazine. I can't remember the name of the author, which really illustrates the problem between architects and interior designers perceived still as male and female. And, interior design is suffering from this negative anti-intellectual ring. And many interior design programs don't have a research element, which really upsets me. So it's still architecture only where you can do research. You need research for interior design programs. So it has only this kind of ring of, the illustrious decorator, airhead type of, and I think that's a great shame. And that's why we need to kind of strengthen. I understand your point with the collections. If you buy something, of course, it wouldn't make sense to tear it apart, but just accentuating interiors and, the methodology and so on, because a lot of interior design programs are just architecture used for the interior, but the whole discourse is not applied, right? And people who work in the field of interior design, they are aware of the discourse. They have certain books and journals and so on that they are aware of. And I think we really need this kind of more theoretical approach as well.
It's interesting you say that, because I sometimes see it completely differently. First of all, we don't buy anything. So all our material we get is donated actually by the architects, because we don't go out there in auctions and buy single kind of drawings and so on. But a market actually for interior design actually exists. So these drawings are much easier accessible or thought of from the market than architecture. So for us, sometimes we see when we take things in that sometimes nice drawings, especially from the interiors, have been taken out in order to put that on the market, which I also find sometimes problematic.
Yeah, thank you, Monika. And now we have a question from Meral to all the panelists. So she's asking, what will be your suggestions for concrete actions by research, teaching, and archival communities in historic interiors to develop contents of archives on urgent pandemic issues, such as historical documentation on climate responsive interior design, etc. So somehow Meral is posing the question strictly related, to a very contemporary issue.
Well, maybe if I talk about the Indian context, as I said, we don't even have a single comprehensive study. So before we kind of address some of these things, I think we are first of all just trying to lay the groundwork. How can we even make sense of this vast material? How can we even write a table of content? That's why I said I would like to work on room typologies, for example, as a starting point. There can be many other possibilities. And this would be for me a priority. I think I'm in a different situation from other countries that already have a vast, body of knowledge and publications, even dedicated journals and so on. So I still have to convince people that this is a worthy field of study, right? Because I don't have these kind of experts. And even at my university, I don't have these this expertise.
From the Library of Congress, it may not be actually directly related to the historic interior, but we are really keen of the urgent matters because our first client is Congressman. Congressman seeks these urgent matters, very closely. And such as pandemic issues, we have been collecting how the city has been changing by the documentary photographer. And we also collect some signage during the pandemic. And of course, climate responses and landscape change or these things, we are collecting the photography collection. So it may not be related to directly interior, but we are always keen about these very high urgent subjects.
Yeah, and with us, it's pretty much the same. For example, at the moment, we just have the exhibition of Yasmin Lari. I mean, again, it's a woman architect, but she, of course, works a lot with interior as well. We don't make, but it's also about materials. So what kind of materials you use. And also, for me, it's interesting what you say. I mean, how do you define, interior in a way, but it's also interior. Same, it's not just private, it's public. I mean, there are a lot of kind of spaces in between. You could also conceive as interior, similar how we understand architecture also being part as interior architecture. So it's, for me, it would also pose maybe a question back, how open are you when you use the term interior? Because is interior also kind of the public space in a sense which is furnished or with interior, but it's kind of city furniture or things like that. So for me, that would also be a question, how you define that. Or is interior always kind of confined?
Yes, Monika, that's very interesting indeed, because for instance, Bruno Taut, he defined the greenery related to his Siedlungen as outer living space, meaning that it is part of the interior of the, physiology of the private space that we need, but it is also a projection toward, what is outer. So that's a very good point, very interesting indeed. we start to have now many interesting comments, and I would like to read the question and considerations by Cameron, who is one of the members of our committee, our group. So my main question is about flows of information welcome into the archives, collections, museums. How do your respective institutions determine which documents to include in your institutional frameworks? Mari mentioned the natural and the national, and international collections at the Library Congress. Mimi mentioned the complexities of India's definition as a geopolitical entity, and Monika highlighted the national stake in Austrian collections. How are boundaries set? When are they challenged? And how do your institutions change to reflect those challenges? This would help historians to anticipate which institutions to explore for resources. So a complex consideration, but I think very relevant.
I can probably start, and then I think the following is same to all of the institutions. Institution has a collection development policy, and when library started way before, we are collecting a lot of European architectural things because we are influenced by that. At the same time, nowadays, things changed. People can travel around, people can see the building by yourself. So this has been changing. And then all of the archives faces the problems about the large collection. We call like archives, you know, majority of the architects working into the institution, and no institution can sustain such things. We collaborate. So I said international, national in focus. However, nowadays, we are more focusing on same approach to Monika, more Americana collection. And then also we are in Washington, DC, so regional collection.
Yeah, I think it's this is a very crucial question, what's being asked, because what we definitely don't want to do, and I think we all passed that, we are not telling a national history anymore or kind of a national canon. So this, of course, challenges us as a national museum. But on the other hand, if you think about Austria, I mean, the borders kept on changing. So what Austria, I mean, what country we are talking about? This differed from the turn of the century till today. And on the other hand, we also perceive architecture anyway as a transnational project because architecture always influenced. So I think what we really need to do, and I think what's happening is looking at architectural history in a transnational way. And I think that also then makes our collections hopefully more interesting for everybody else or kind of international out there. And that's something we are kind of struggling with in a way to make other people outside of Austria also interested in our archives and in our collection, because I think, and of course, as I very briefly saw with the Cold War issue and everything, I mean, architecture was always on an international and global scale.
Yes, I think this is very relevant, and also on top of that, as we see in the chat between Lauren and Mimi, they are debating on the fact that it is essential somehow to have an interdisciplinary approach. So somehow these boundaries must be enlarged. It is impossible, you know, to confine one discipline without having also an approach they are talking about. For instance, the heritage sector, of course, as we mentioned, architecture and interior architecture, history, to have a proper overview. And so in these regards, I think that some of the examples that we saw today in the collections are very innovative in this regard and can really lead us and guide us for posing a better research question, you know, in a different complexity that we are urgently in need. Do we have other questions from the audience? Well, it seems we don't. I don't know if Jennifer or Meral, do you have some comments?
I think that it has been an exciting step to establish new dialogues between historic interiors and archives, collections, historical documentation practice. And I hope we continue this endeavor with new questions and problems in the near future together. Thanks, everyone.
May I ask you the final question to the audience? I really welcome this opportunity to speak and make a bridge between archivists, the museum, library, archives, and SAH users. But if we continue this kind of dialogue at the SAH virtual conferences, is it helpful or not? I would like to hear, because I am going to see the SAH new director in the near future and some other scholars for the vice president next year to talk about such kind of dialogue. So I would like to hear if this session was useful, and we would like to continue.
Yes, definitely. I think that this will be very useful, and it's very opportune to continue. And so we will be in touch for sure. And I would like to conclude by thanking really deeply our three panelists. It was really a pleasure to have these presentations, providing a new knowledge and insights, and somehow inspiring all of us in further steps in our research. I also would like to do a little comment about, our title, use the word flow. So in archaic English, to flow means also to abound, to be plentiful, to be abundant. This field we are exploring here surprisingly flows with innovative concepts and ideas. And I think that this is really the great part of this panel. Also, I would like to thank Meral, Ekincioglu, Jennifer Kaufman-Buller, and Gareth White, and all the members of the Historic Interiors Affiliate Group for their contributions and for making this wonderful panel possible. So thank you, everybody. If there are no more comments, we can close our panel here. Thank you also to all the participants. Many people were interested in our topic, and this is a fantastic result for us, for all of us. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.